Government Demographic Services Water. So agenda to the agenda. Item 1. Apologies.
Apologies to everyone received from Councillor Brown and will be received.
Thank you. Do we have any declarations of interest in according with the regulations? Councillor West.
It's not really a declaration of interest, simply to say that the applicant, someone commenting on the application number 2022-861 full emailed the letter from the solicitor which was addressed to me. Now that doesn't affect how I come to this meeting in terms of the date, but you can see in the addendum, I think what it's in this addendum or one of the other addendums, that there is a it's addressed to me, perhaps looking at to make clear that I have no particular part or interest in that.
Just for myself to make clear that I am friends with one of the employees of the Empingham applicant agent, but they're not presented tonight, and in no way takes my open mind on that. Petitions, deputations, and questions. I think we have several requests to speak this evening. These will be heard under the relevant planning application. An officer will introduce each application, give their recommendation. We'll then hear from any members of the public and parish council representatives or ward members, and if they're not on the committee, and then from the applicant or representative before moving to the debate. I believe on the Empingham application, the ward member, Councillor Waller, has also asked to speak as part of the debate, but will not vote. So that is fine by me. So we'll move on to planning applications. Item 4 is report number 112-2023, detailing applications for consideration. There's no minutes. It's a special meeting, so there are no minutes. So the first application, 2022-0861, full land off Main Street, Cottesmore, erection of 8 dwellings on land to the southeast of Main Street, Cottesmore. Recommendation approval subject to conditions. Justin Johnson, would you like to present the report?
Thank you, Chairman. Before I start the presentation, I'll just draw members' attention to the addendum report. There's been a number of comments that have been made. I'll just go through those quickly. The first one is the lead local flood authority have been consulted and raised no objections to the proposed development, but they have requested a condition be attached to any consent, and that is set out on page 1 of the addendum and is proposed to be included as part of the officer recommendation. In addition, there have been ongoing discussions with regards to affordable housing. The affordable housing officer has advised that in line with the council's planning obligations SPD supplementary planning document, an off-site contribution of £195,168 plus the legal monitoring and sealing fees would be appropriate in this instance, and that is also index linked to ensure that it goes up with inflation. Additional comments. There have been one additional letter from the occupier on Main Street, which I've set out in full in the report. It raised concerns primarily with flood risk was the additional comment, but there have been, all of the comments have been picked up in the report, but there was also concerns about residential amenity, I said flood risk, and I believe access was also a concern that was raised as well, and there was an earlier objection letter that's also attached. There was also a further comment from going through those objection letters. Also, as you pass through them, there's also, I've included a number of photographs that the lady had submitted just to show flooding in the area. The field that is shown flooded isn't the application site, it's an adjacent field. To just point that out, but we'll pick that up in the presentation. Then there was concerns raised from a neighbour who had sought legal advice, which is the one that Councillor West was referring to from Chatterton, and that was with regards to legal right of access. And the applicant solicitors have also made a response to that. Ultimately, that legal right of access and how that is maintained, it was a civil matter between the parties, but the two legal representations are set out there for the members to see. And then finally on page 14, again, there was a letter from a lady that was unable to attend the meeting tonight, but again, raised concerns, again, primarily about the access to the site and the suitability in terms of highway safety. So in terms of officers' comments on that, it's recommended that the additional condition from the League Local Federal Authorities is imposed, and that a section 106 is signed to secure the off-site affordable housing provisions in line with policy. So to the presentation. The site itself, you can see there to the south of Main Street in Cottesmore. This is the area of land in question. You can see that you've got the field, which is the site. Access is taken between properties through this access track. And you've got a sports field to the rear and sports use to the side, and then residential land uses to the north of the site. The proposal itself is to erect 8 dwellings, which would include, I'll come back to that, 8 dwellings, which would include 3 bungalows and 5 2-story dwellings. Go through some of the photographs. So this is showing the access. Main Street to the rear, and this is looking at the site down the access drive. Then you can see the this is just shot across the field. You can see that there are, it's probably one of the better ones. It shows the field with hedgerow trees across the boundaries, and this shows some of the properties backing onto the site from Main Street as well. So this is I'm stood at the southwest corner looking back to the north. So as I said, the proposals for 8 dwellings, 3 bungalows, which would be these 3, 1, 2, 3, and then the rest are 2-story properties. So in terms of elevations, you can see a fairly traditional approach, stone properties. This is the single-story properties, and then the 2-story dwellings again. Some room in the roof space above the garage there as well, dormer windows, and again the larger property. So there's 3 house types across the whole of the development. The relevant planning policies are set out in the report, but they're listed on the slides on screen now. This is an excerpt from the neighbourhood plan area, which seeks to safeguard a number of areas from development. You can see that the sports fields to the south of the site are actually within that zone. The actual site itself is outside of the protection zone, but is clearly outside of the plan limits of development, which is the black line that you can see there. So as set out in the report, the site is located beyond the plan limits of the development, but it is located adjacent to it. And it's considered that it would be a sustainable location for development and that could make a reasonable contribution towards maintaining the council's 5-year housing land supply. In terms of impact on character, as we've set out in the report, it's considered that the design and the proposed materials are acceptable and appropriate in this location. The site is fairly secluded, as could be seen from the site photos. And in terms of impact on amenity, it's considered that there is sufficient separation distance in terms of space between dwellings, gardens, to ensure that there's no overlooking, overshadowing or loss of privacy. There has been concern raised in terms of noise from the adjacent sports fields, but again, given the separation distances and the fact that anybody buying a property there would know that they're buying a property next to a sports pitch, it's not considered unacceptable, and it's similar to other relationships across the county. Heritage, the Conservation Officer has been consulted and raised no objections to the proposal. And the Highway Authority have also considered the proposals and raised no objections to the access arrangements. There was concern, obviously, as I said, additional concerns been raised from residents about flood risk, and in particular, I think the adjacent field as well. I've spoken to the lead local flood authority officer, Robin, who's with us tonight, and been advised that the area that's shown on the pictures, it isn't the field that's being proposed to be developed, and that subject to conditions, that the flooding would not be an issue and can be suitably controlled. I also set out in the addendum as well, in terms of affordable housing, it's considered that an off-site provision would be a reasonable approach in this instance, and that we should be seeking the 195,000 figure that's set out in the report, and that's based on the council's adopted policy in the SPD, like I've already said. The £228 figure is a figure that was set at the time the guidance was done and has been picked up with inflation, and that was based on the figures are calculated based on a 4-bedroomed affordable dwelling, and again, as is the 107-metre squared floor area. So that's the floor area that an average affordable 4-bedroom property we would expect to see. A 3-bedroom would be about 85 square meters. So multiplying those out, that's where you get the £195,000 figure from. So overall, it is a balanced recommendation. Clearly, the application is contrary to the PLD policies that are set out. But in terms of the site's location, the fact that the site, and it has no weight, it was a site that was considered for allocation in the now withdrawn local plan, but that can be given no weight in itself. But it is an appropriate logical extension to Cottesmore that will come forward at some point, and does make a reasonable contribution towards our affordable housing provision and maintaining that 5-year housing land supply. On that basis, Chairman, it's recommended for approval. Thank you.
Thank you. We've got a number of speakers. First, can I ask Mary Kate, member of the public, opposing the application? Thank you. If you'd like to turn your microphone on, you have 3 minutes from when you start speaking. Thank you.
My name is Mary Kate. My home is 13 Main Street, which stands at the rear of 15 Main Street. My house is the only one which has a right-of-way leading to the application site. This is a legal right-of-way granted in 1989 when the house was built. My late husband and I bought the property in 2004. The secluded situation and yet in the centre of the village attracted us to buy our house. The access drive was very muddy, so we laid gravel. The drive is bounded by the end of my barn and my neighbour's house, Mr. and Mrs. Field, at number 11. The Highways Department have raised no objections, but a 4.8 metre tarmac road is not safe for 2 vehicles to pass. No consideration has been given to the situation this development would put me in. I only have one access to my property, and it is on this drive. The traffic that this proposal will procure is madness given the situation. Any amount of cars would be used by residents plus many of their visitors. With people shopping more online, deliveries would be many. Then there are the services. It is ludicrous to say that by taking the hedge out, it will make the access suitable, especially as there is no scope for a passing bay. So if a car is entering from the main road and a vehicle is exiting the drive, the vehicle would have to back out onto the main road. This action is not only dangerous, but illegal. There is no footpath in the plan, making moving up and down the drive hazardous, whether driving or on foot. Presumably, families will be wanting to walk children to school. Having run the gauntlet down the drive, there is no pavement on either side of the road, on this side of the road. So the busy main road then has to be crossed for a pavement. Another point to draw your attention to is both I and my neighbour need to erect scaffolding and ladders at times to maintain our properties. Cleaning guttering, which has to be done frequently in autumn and winter. Cleaning and painting of windows, which also open out onto the drive. Mr. and Mrs. Field's house has a rendered finish, which has to be painted and maintained. My barn is stone, which may need attention at any time, especially with the traffic that will be using the drive. By doing this, we would be obstructing the carriageway, yet again pointing out the need for pavements either side. There is another concern. The fact that the field is higher than the houses on Main Street is causing great concern that with water runoff coupled with the high water table will cause more extensive flooding, especially at the west end of the site, close to where the Cottesmore Lake forms. As number 1, Mr. and Mrs. Wheeler,
Sorry, can I ask you to wrap up, please? Your 3 minutes is up. Thank you.
their garden floods. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you. If you'd like to stay there, just in case the panel have got any questions. Is there any questions for, does the panel have any questions? No questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
The next deputation is from Mr. Chris Donovan, member of Cottesmore Parish Council. Mr. Donovan, you've been here before, you're aware of the rules, but your time starts now. There we go.
Good evening, members. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak on behalf of Cottesmore Parish Council in relation to this application. We object to it both on the timing and its form. Last April, this committee refused an admittedly much larger application in Cottesmore, one reason being that it was premature pending the outcome of the local plan call for site process, which has closed and is subsequently under consideration by your council. This matters as this is the process by which local plan policy is made and reviewed. Your officer's report clearly shows how this proposal is contrary to many of the key policies relating to this site. It is outside the plan limits of development, and the fact that it is adjacent to it is no justification for ignoring this policy. It clearly will have a significant and detrimental impact on the conservation area at this location. Your report clearly states, indeed, that the proposed development is contrary to the policies set out in the development plan. This, in a sense, should be the end of the matter. Furthermore, as the report acknowledges, is also contrary to the Cottesmore Neighbourhood Plan, which I should add is, of course, the most up-to-date development plan document in relation to Cottesmore. It is contrary to Cot H1 relating to the PLD, it is its impact on the conservation area and local residents' amenity, and in not including affordable housing provision, Cot H3. It is also contrary to policy Cot H2, which clearly indicates new dwelling provision should be predominantly of 3-bedroom or 1 to 2-bedroom starter homes. The applicant has made no effort to show the exceptional circumstances, which, as the plan says, would be the only basis on which this policy could be set aside. To suggest this proposal is anywhere close to meeting this policy is clearly wrong. 3-bedroom bungalows, by definition, in this location will be expensive. Fundamentally, what you have before you is a proposal for 8 luxury dwellings, which are not needed here and totally contrary to local residents' priorities. There are obviously no affordable dwellings on the site, and despite being a full application, we note at the time, I think that may have been updated since, the comment that the agent is anticipating a contribution to off-site provision. But even if this is provided, it will be of no direct benefit to the residents of Cottesmore. In any event, Cot H3 of the neighbourhood plan requires a minimum of 35% affordable housing, with developments of more than 5 dwellings requiring the element to be provided on site. You've heard from the residents who have significant concerns about the approach to the access, the shared surface access. It is quite clear that 8 dwellings, remember 33 bedrooms proposed on this development, could generate a considerable amount of traffic. With no footway included, because there isn't room, pedestrian safety, not mentioned hardly in the report, will be constantly at risk in competing with vehicles in both directions, moving around each other and backing up. The site entrance.
Mr. Donovan, could you conclude? Please?
Yeah. The site entrance at Main Street provides no safe and secure point for crossing. So I come back to the fact that the main reason, we just feel that this is the wrong development in the wrong place and the wrong time to be making a decision about it.
Thank you, Mr. Donovan. Have the panel got any questions? Councillor Cool. Keep your microphone.
Question
2016.
2016. Yeah, that's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any further questions? In that case, thank you.
Thank you.
Could I now please request deputation from Mr. Helliwell, the agent for the development? Thank you. Same rules apply, 3 minutes when you start speaking.
Good evening, councillors. The council acknowledges the essential need to take a positive approach to housing applications which are deemed appropriate and deliverable. So firstly, is the site appropriate? The proposal site stands out as one of the few areas surrounding Cottesmore that isn't explicitly safeguarded from development in the neighbourhood development plan. It's immediately adjacent to the settlement boundary and bounded by developments on 3 sides. Additionally, the land was allocated for 8 dwellings in the withdrawn local plan. It underwent a rigorous scoring and selection process, which found the site to be the most appropriate for development in Cottesmore. The assessment concluded, quote, "The site is suitable for allocation as a residential site with an indicative capacity of 8 dwellings." The applicant actively engaged with the council throughout the allocation process, including consultation and site meetings with stakeholders. The withdrawal of the local plan was unrelated to the suitability of this site, and had it progressed, construction would likely be underway by now. Considering the recommendation today and the historic allocation, the site is demonstrably appropriate for development. Secondly, is the site deliverable? The application is detailed and its approval would immediately add 8 dwellings to the council's housing land supply. Much has been said on access, and whilst this was also considered at the allocation stage, the applicant has since provided a detailed transport assessment, which was agreed in conjunction with the local highways authority. The access road is owned by the applicant. The assessment evidences that the access from Main Street will achieve a width of 4.8 metres, sufficient for simultaneous 2-way flow of cars. Suitable visibility at the points of access has been evidenced, and the plots each have ample on-site parking. The local highways authority have no objections to the proposals. No constraints would impede timely development, and the applicant is eager to start work if planning permission is granted. In conclusion, the site is both appropriate and deliverable, and its development would make a notable and immediate contribution to the council's housing supply. It's no secret that we are in the middle of a national housing crisis, and members of this committee have the ability to approve appropriate schemes to reduce that shortfall. Cottesmore is a local service centre, one of the 7 largest villages in the county, and just like other villages in the settlement hierarchy, Cottesmore is expected to deliver its share of new housing. The site was a former allocation, is not safeguarded from development with the neighbourhood plan, and it is recommended for approval. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from the panel? Yes. thanks.
I don't know if this is part of the application, but is it going to be concreted, the driveway, and who's responsible for the drive?
So there are conditions specifying that we would need to submit the detail of the access. It would be adopted. I expect it to be a permeable block pave from the point from Main Street into the site.
So say again, what would it be?
Permeable block paving.
Thank you. Councillor Corbyn. Kevin, microphone.
Sorry. It's troubling me, sorry, the access is troubling me. If we have 2 cars passing each other at 4.8 metres, and there is a family, a mother with a pram and pushchair, for example, also on that street, can we safely get 2 cars passing each other and a mother with a pram or a young family?
So the access arrangement would be a shared surface, so it would be shared between vehicles and pedestrians. This is designed as per the guidance set out in the Manual for Streets. According to the Manual for Streets guidance, shared surfaces work well for cul-de-sac arrangements like this, and where the volume of traffic is below 100 vehicles per hour, which it would be in this case. So it has been designed in accordance with the Manual for Streets guidance.
Councillor West.
Thank you, Chairman. Why do none of your houses have any solar panels or renewables showing, and why do they all have chimneys?
That's a very fair question. I think in terms of, firstly, on the renewable technologies, we often don't depict them on the planning drawings. The reason for that is that due to the requirement to build strictly in accordance with the plans and the constantly changing and evolving renewable technologies, we often don't specify. That doesn't mean that the permitted development rights available to the landowner will be removed. So at the technical design stage, I fully expect that all renewable technology options will be explored. Given the increasing sustainable construction demands and building regs, it's very likely that will be explored. Condition 16 does require that the developer provides all details of the energy efficiency measures before the work commences, at which point that can be scrutinised by the council.
Yes, Councillor West.
Thank you. Thanks. Sorry, the enormous addendum came through at late stage for us today, and I haven't had a chance, I'm afraid, to read quite all of it, but I gather there's more information there on flooding and flood remediation. Could you just, for my benefit and the benefit of the members of the committee, just in a nutshell, tell us exactly what you are doing to mitigate against flood risk on that site and its neighbouring properties?
Yeah, absolutely. So there was a drainage strategy already submitted with this application in support of the proposals. That's been reviewed by your lead local flood authority. The site is in an area identified as low probability flooding, flood zone 1. Obviously, we need to ensure through the development that it doesn't increase the risk of flooding elsewhere. So as part of that strategy, we're primarily focused on surface and foul water disposal through the public sewer system. We have had discussions as part of that engagement with Anglian Water, who have signed off on that proposal in principle. But equally, there has been a late condition added to the proposal, which will ensure that a very detailed drainage strategy is submitted and approved in writing before the development can commence.
Okay, thank you. I'm conscious that on the bottom left corner of that blue line around the site there, that is effectively the corner of, well, what's colloquially known as Cottesmore Lake, which is quite a large pond, and the water does come through that hedge line most winters. Now, I'm just wondering in what direction you can possibly get rid of water from that site, if not into.
Sure. Well, the LFA have noticed that or acknowledged that it's a low density development, and therefore there is suitable land around each of the properties to provide private drainage plots. The drainage strategy will obviously go through the regular consultations at the point that it's submitted as part of that condition being discharged. But I would really expect the drainage environment to be enhanced post-intervention to reduce that likelihood of flooding both for future occupiers and neighbouring properties.
Christine.
I might be being simplistic, but I thought the local plan or neighbourhood plan asked for 1, 2 and 3 bedroom houses. This has 2 6-bedroom houses. Can you explain to me how that fits in with the neighbourhood plan?
Yeah, we have obviously taken stock of the neighbourhood plan, which does recognise or support proposals for those moving into retirement. That's why we've got the 3 bungalows there. We've also got 3 4-bed family homes. There are 2 6-bed larger properties. The constraint of the site in this case is access, and we're constrained to 8 units. So rather than put forward several smaller 8 units up to 8 being the maximum quantum, we put a variation of plots in there. There is a requirement in the NPPF to make the most efficient use of land, and in this case, given we couldn't apply for more than 8 units on this site, that's dictated the house types we've gone for.
But 8 units could have been 8 3-bedded units, and it would have reduced the traffic down that access road, because 6-bed houses are not only going to have 1 car each.
The scheme has been designed how it has, and the access is perfectly capable of taking on all the movements generated by the properties and the housing mix that we put forward.
Any further questions from the panel? In that case, thank you.
Thank you.
The final deputation is from the ward member councillor Samantha Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. I'm here today to voice the community opposition and concerns surrounding this development. This site is outside the PLD, is on greenfield land in open countryside, and the plans are offering large market value homes only. This is contrary to CS1, CS2, CS4, CS10, CS11, SP6 and SP10. The absence of affordable housing on site contradicts essential policies aimed at ensuring a diverse and inclusive community, namely CS11, SP9, SP10 and COT-H3. Our housing planning officer has emphasised the need for 2 affordable houses on the development, and it is crucial that this requirement is seriously considered. As such, a contribution would not be appropriate, as it would almost certainly not offer affordable homes within the village and does not appear compatible with the exceptions allowed under Planning Obligations Supplementary Planning Document 2016 at B2.3. Moreover, the proposed housing mix raises further concerns. It doesn't align to the strategic housing market assessment or key policies CS2 and COT-H2. These all emphasise the importance of catering to the needs of our population and providing a balanced and sustainable housing supply. Recently, legal advice has been offered at planning meetings around applications outside the PLD and the precedent they may set, including to site allocation work. This application is very similar, and it also offers no exceptions to CS4 and SP6. In May, members were offered advice re the 5-year housing supply and future need in relation to the site allocation work. This applies even more as consultation on the site allocations is imminent. Councillor Donovan has outlined the concerns of the parish council and the neighbourhood plan. This development is contrary to H1, H2, H3, H5, H8 and EN1. The detailed plans make no reference to waste management. There's no bin storage details present. Members are aware of the changes to bin collections, including new legislation on recycling and food waste. No provision is made on site for any of these, contrary to NPPF paragraph 40, the NPPW paragraph 8, CS2, CS19 and SP15. There are no green energy and climate change proposals. This is contrary to SP15, CS20 and COT-EN1 and Design Guide 5B. It is our duty to prioritise sustainable practices and ensure that developments are in line with environmental guidelines. Although a condition has been added regarding this, it's essential that design guidelines are followed and that environmental factors are developed within the plans rather than as an afterthought. Pedestrian accessibility and safety is not thought through, contrary to CS 18, Design Guide 22, COT H5 and H8. The absence of proper footpaths and crossing points pose significant risk to our community's well-being. There is no crossing point and no footpaths on that side of the road. Pedestrians cannot access the village amenities without crossing the road from the shared visibility displays or walking on the grass verge. This will not be practical for a school run with a pushchair during a busy morning, and we must prioritise the safety of our residents, especially our children. As of May, our 5-year housing supply calculation is at 7.4 years. And whilst it's recognised that without the continuous ongoing supply of sites provided by an adopted local plan, it's important we continue to take a positive approach to applications. These need to be appropriate and deliverable. This does not suggest that we include developments just because they may be deliverable quickly. Balance of approval has been tilted in this case due to the proposal being full and quickly deliverable. However, the lack of detailed surveys, the need for 11 conditions that require further work, surveys and plans submitted to the authority for approval prior to start, including ecology in an area with regular newt sightings, drainage in an area with a high water table that's adjacent to the Cottesmore Lake, and archaeology in an area flagged as red under the 2017 site analysis. They all raise serious doubts about the feasibility and speed of the project. As representatives of the community, we have a responsibility to make decisions that will benefit our residents and future generations. It's our duty to uphold the planning policies that have been thoughtfully developed to guide our growth. Unfortunately, this development falls short and is contrary to 8 core strategies, 4 spatial strategies, 6 neighbourhood plan strategies, the Strategic Housing Market Assessment 2020, the Design Guide for Rutland 2021, and the National Planning Policy for Waste. I therefore encourage members to reject the application.
Thank you. Any questions from members? If not, can I just ask one, Councillor Harvey? I should have asked this of Councillor Donovan, but I didn't, so I'll ask you. Why wasn't this site protected by the neighbourhood plan?
I think it is felt that at some point it might be, and it came forward in the 2017 as deliverable for 8 units. I think the fact is, Cottesmore accepts that we will need some growth within the village, and therefore we are happy to discuss that. I think the main issue with this side is the fact it is currently outside the PLD with no exceptions. There's no affordable housing on it, and our neighbourhood plan does protect us in as much as we would really like houses fit for our community, which are smaller houses, not 4 or 5, 6 bedroom properties.
Thank you. Any further questions? Yes, Councillor Smith.
Could I just check, in the Cottesmore neighbourhood plan, it does say that development should not take place outside the plan limits of development. That is quite clearly stated in your neighbourhood plan.
It is, and it's worth noting that when the neighbourhood plan was produced in 2016, Cottesmore had already had a small estate, Jubilee Gardens as we know it, built, and actually that fitted in with the local plan at the time with how many houses were to be developed. So we always agreed within the housing neighbourhood plan that infill would occur, but actually it was felt that we'd already done our share towards that local plan by Jubilee Gardens. Obviously, things have changed since the new local plan process, which is actually why we're in the position we're in.
Thank you. Any further questions? Okay, thank you, Councillor Harvey. I will now open up to the committee for debate and questions of officers. Councillor Smith.
I think a big issue is that this development is outside the planned limits of development. And if granted, then it has implications for other plan limits development in other villages and towns. I had difficulty reading the justification, understanding the justification outlined by the officers. I don't know if I've got it right. But the argument seemed to be, although it's outside the plan limits of development, is argued important for the 5-year housing supply. And it would have been improved in the previous, it would be approved in the developing local plan and was approved in the previous plan. I just wonder if 8 houses will make that much difference.
Chairman, if I can just respond to a couple of points there. Yes, it was allocated in the now withdrawn local plan. That has no weight, so members should not give that any weight. Other than to say that the assessment that was done at that time, and as per our assessment now with this current application, is it's a suitable site for housing. In terms of being outside of the PLD, as we've said in the report, it is contrary to that policy. The policy is there to protect land outside of the PLD. The issue that we have here is obviously that whilst we've got a 5-year housing land supply, that there is inevitably a fact that if we don't continue to allow some sites on what we consider to be appropriate ones, we could end up with large green fields on the edge of Cottesmore outside that we will then struggle to defend, or other villages in the county. So officers have made an assessment and considered that this site, if we were going to allow a site to go for residential development, this is an appropriate one. It's surrounded by residential development, as you can see from the plan there, and then you've got the sports field to the east and to the south. So on that basis, it is well screened. We thought it was an appropriate site. I appreciate what members are saying and what residents and other speakers today have said about in terms of the size of the dwellings. And I think if we could accommodate more dwellings on this site, then what we would be saying as officers is it's a site that can accommodate more than 8 dwellings, and we'd look for smaller 3-bedroom properties. The fact is that because of the access restrictions, we can't accept, and highways won't accept more than 8 dwellings off that site. So that in turn lends itself to larger properties and to make best use of that land, which is why we've got the properties that we've got on there. Obviously, the applicants said themselves that they have tried to take on board some of the local concern, because they have included bungalows within the scheme as well. With regards to PLD as well, what I would say is this doesn't, in my opinion, set a precedent for us allowing others. It has to be each case in its own merits. And as I've set out in the report and in my presentation, there are clearly a set of circumstances in this case that we think justify a recommendation of approval. But it is a balanced one, and it is one that members will have to take into account. The affordable housing issue that's been discussed, the policy does allow for off-site contributions, and the reason why we've looked at an off-site contribution is again because of the numbers of dwellings that you're restricted to on the site. I have had some brief discussions with the applicant, and I think whilst preference would be certainly for the off-site contribution, if it was looking at a refusal, then on that basis alone, then they would consider a redesign to possibly put 2 affordable units on there and look for a deferral on that basis. But as far as officers are concerned, the dwellings proposed, the 3 bungalows that make a contribution, bungalows are not something that we get a lot of in Rutland. That we think that it is a reasonable contribution, and the legal agreement for affordable housing would seek to secure its use within ideally the Cottesmore area, and then if nothing came up within that area, then it would look for further afield across the county. But the starting point would be looking locally first of all. I think that's everything. Thank you, Chairman.
I think Hans was next. Thank you.
In regards to renewable and solar panels, the applicant said that any kind of changes to that would have to be at a later stage. I wonder if that's correct. And also, what is it that we just don't have the policy in place to allow for that?
That's correct. There's the council currently have no policy to require energy efficiency within dwellings in terms of solar panels, heat source pumps, that sort of thing. It's something that we're looking to develop as part of the new local plan process. In addition, there are requirements under building regulations that the developers will have to put in. It's not a planning requirement, it's building regulations in terms of electric vehicle charging points and things like that. So what we have done is put conditions on to say, well, look, if you are going to put solar panels on, we want to see the details of them to make sure, or any other energy efficiency things such as ground source heat pumps, to make sure that we've got control over that. But until we've got a policy that requires these solar panels, etc., on buildings, we're going to have this difficulty. Thank you.
It is also possible to put an informative thing, isn't it, Justin, on that lines?
Yes, yeah. I mean, we can put an informative on to promote the use of them, but I don't want members to be confused to think that we can insist on them. At the moment, with the policies that we've got, we can't insist, but we do actively encourage developers to do that. And that's why we've got this condition on in this instance. And a lot of homeowners are now looking at that in terms of trying to make their homes economical.
Thank you. Councillor McGrath.
Thank you. I was interested to hear that 4.8 metres is assumed to be an adequate width for vehicles to pass each other. So I did a little research while the discussion was going on, and I found that according to the 2019 Manual for Streets, 4.8 metres is indeed the minimum width for a car to pass a rigid vehicle. This is the national guidance for new roads. And I have two questions about that. One is, does this qualify as a new road? And therefore, should that rule strictly be deemed to apply in this case? The second one is, the agent for the applicant mentioned that this would be a shared use track. I'd like clarification on that, because my understanding of shared use tracks, as both a pedestrian and a cyclist, as well as a car driver, is that shared use tracks that I come across are for cyclists and pedestrians, not for cars, cyclists, pedestrians, pushchairs, as somebody mentioned. So I would like clarification of both those points.
Justin or Robin?
Yeah,
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So your first comment about a new road, yes, this would qualify as a new road because ultimately at the moment it's just an access leading to a field. It would be upgraded to a 4.8 metre shared surface. So then going to shared surface, so you're saying there's a shared surface, it's like a cycleway footpath. They're 3 metres in width and they would just be used by pedestrians and cyclists. This would be a shared use road. So they're used by pedestrians, cyclists and vehicles. They're used all around the country. We've got some sites that have already been approved through committee and through planning in Rutland that are shared use services. They have a minimum width of 4.8 and they can go up to 5.5. The narrower the road, the slower your vehicle speeds will be on that road. So that would be a suitable road for this size of development. And that's why we've also limited it to 8 properties. We wouldn't want any more properties off that road.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Payne.
Actually, I was also going to raise issues that have been raised by my colleagues about access. And I'm just looking at this and I'm thinking, so 2 white vans, one coming in, one going out, going down that road. And the lady in the pushchair has got a baby going down that road. And then if one of the people who lives on that road decides they want to put up scaffolding because they quite rightly might want to do something for their own property, I don't see that work, quite frankly. and I'd be interested to know how that could be made to work.
Thank you, Chair. If somebody was going to put up scaffolding on that road, they would have to have it signed accordingly and have part of the road blocked off. So then you'd almost create an informal chicane for the period of time that it is put up. Through loads of villages in Rutland, we put in chicanes, we make roads narrow to slow vehicles down. You'll still get 2 vehicles driving down that road and one will have to wait. So again, you're slowing your traffic down. With your pedestrians in the road, I understand that people do have safety concerns around them, but that's the reason why you keep them narrow, is to keep the vehicle speeds down, and vehicles do tend to drive slower if you see a pedestrian in the carriageway. The people walking to that property will be the people that live there, ultimately. So we feel shared services are suitable roads for these sort of developments.
I wish I could share your optimism. I'm afraid I don't.
Thank you. Further questions, Councillor Corby.
I asked the chairman of the parish council earlier on about the neighbourhood plan. And he said that been in place since 2016. That seemed to me to be very clear with regard to the type of housing that the local neighbourhoods were happy to accept, and I think potentially are still happy to accept, given the changes. My concern here again is that we do encourage our local parishes and villages to work on neighbourhood plans for the benefit of their own communities. Yet this development is completely throws out in the face. Affordable housing, no affordable housing there. So again, how does this set a precedent for us as a planning committee when our neighbourhoods have set out planning a neighbourhood plan? CS4, I believe it states here, local service centres grow through small scale allocated sites with affordable housing sites. So again, I just asked the question from a planning perspective, from an office perspective, where we go with this.
So, as I said in the presentation and sort of set out in the report, the restrictions on the site limited. In an ideal world, we would have more dwellings accessed off this site, and we would have a lot of smaller dwellings. So we'd probably have 16 smaller dwellings off there. But because of the access arrangements and things like that, we can't and won't accept 16 dwellings. So that inevitably means that if you're making best use of the site, you will put larger dwellings on it. Otherwise, it will look. You will either have very small properties with exceedingly large gardens, which may bring into viability, questions of viability of the site, or you would potentially only develop part of the site, which again isn't in line with the policy about making best use of the land. So what we've done is effectively what is most appropriate in terms of the layout, making most effective use of the land. That's what the developers have done. The issue about the affordable housing provision, an affordable contribution is being provided. The council's policies do allow for that. The SPD guidance does allow for off-site contributions. Now, as has already been set out, the policy would start to look for on-site to start with. But again, there are the issues with the size of the properties and the restrictions on the land. That's why the developer has I believe, come in with the proposal for the off-site contribution. As I've said, I have had brief discussions with them, and whilst it does cause, I think, some issues for them, and certainly for the layout and house types and things like that. I think if that was going to be the members' main reason for refusal, then they would ask that the application is deferred, so that they can possibly try and come back with a scheme with two affordable houses on site rather than the off-site contribution. But from a policy point of view, it is a reasonable approach to take. The affordable housing officer has based the calculation on our policy guidance, and if that contribution was made, that element of it would be policy compliant.
Thank you, councillor Corby for this. Thank you. I think councillor Payne was next, then councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. I'm still a little bit worried about this flooding. I know we've asked the LFA to, or the LFA have asked for a condition to be applied, but it all seems a bit woolly to me, and I just wonder if you can reassure the committee in any way about anything more specific than we've got from the LFA at present.
Thank you, Chair. The drainage strategy that's been provided by the developer doesn't necessarily go into enough detail. They've not carried out ground infiltration testing to see if they could have individual plot soakaways. At the moment, they're proposing all the rainwater from the rooftops, the driveways goes into a pipe system, which then goes into a crate underground system, and then outfills into the angular water pipes. But the LLFA, we feel that a more suitable on-site drainage scheme could be provided for each individual plot to have underground storage crates or their impermeable paved drive, so they all manage their own surface water. They then could provide something else for the main driveway and the access road leading into the site. We've therefore put a condition on that's a pre-commencement condition that states that they have to provide full detailed drainage drawings, they have to provide ground investigations, flood water exceedance flow, so that's if the system for whatever reason backs up or that it's heavy rainfall, where that water goes, they've got to map all of that out, and all of that information has to come into us and be approved before they can commence on site.
Okay, and we will look at the impact on neighbouring properties as well as the site itself, will we, of that drainage?
Yeah, so the flood exceedant flow routes, that will show where the water's going. So if, let's say, it does show there's an arrow going towards one of the properties, we can get them to change the levels of the ground or provide extra measures in that area to prevent flooding to a neighbouring property.
Councillor Smith.
Yeah, my question is just a bit more clarification about the role of the neighbourhood plan. Councillor Donovan from Cottesmore Parish Council pointed out that their neighbourhood plan is, as it were, the most up-to-date because the existing core strategy is 2011 and theirs is 2016. So, which takes precedent, as it were?
So in terms of the policies, all of the policies within the neighbourhood plan and within our own local plan are relevant to the determination. And it's an assessment of which are the most up to date, but it's not just about which is the most up to date, it's also which are most in accordance with the current national guidance as well, because thinking may have changed on it. So I think generally the policies are pretty similar, because I think when the neighbourhood plan was produced, it had to be in accordance with with our plan anyway. So a lot of the issues around planning limits of development and things like that, for example, the policies are very, very similar in terms of their requirements.
Thank you. Councillor West, I think, was.
Right, members. There's a few things worry me about this one. The PLD is a big issue for me, mainly because it was used as a reason for rejection for another site within my ward in Market Overton, where we had significant public interest in proceeding with the development, and yet we still rejected it based on that PLD line, which we were rigid with. 3 weeks ago, we ultimately deferred a decision on a site in.
Sorry, can I just bear in mind we've got to look at each on their merit.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but that again, based on PLD, for me, the issue of the PLD here is a big one. But the merits of this one, I mean, this worries me that the applicant is apparently prepared to come forward and actually change it to put in some affordable housing if it's looking like it might go the wrong way for them. And I don't particularly like that approach. I feel that if they were going to put the affordables, if they're prepared to, why aren't they there at the outset? There's an awful lot of work to be done, as displayed in all of these conditions, which show that there is still work to be done there. And I feel that if they want to change the design of this and come back with something a little bit more satisfactory, which might allay some of our concerns, which you've heard in the committee tonight, they've got ample opportunity to do that. They can apply whenever they like, and they can also sort out the conditions whilst they're doing it. For me, that seems like the most sensible thing to do. There's so many conditions here, and the flooding for me is a big one. That's right on it's on the banks of the Cottesmore Lake, as it were. And I don't like the idea of approving development in principle somewhere where we're not completely happy with flood mitigation measures, because we haven't seen whether they're possible or not.
Thank you. Do you want to hold that forward? Do you want to put that forward as a proposal when we finish, please do. Christine.
I share councillor West's concerns about the planned limits. I'm also a little bit concerned about this idea. The neighbourhood plan wanted affordable housing. There isn't any affordable housing. We don't want to bother to put it on this site, so we're going to give you some money to pay to take it somewhere else. What if every developer just says, I'll give you some money, go and put it somewhere else? Which town is going to end up with the huge housing estate with all the affordable housing? It's meant to be in each village, and we should be fighting for that. We were asked earlier about, well, if we have smaller houses, what do we do with the land? At the moment, this land is a community resource. If we had smaller houses on here, we could still have a community green space here. We should be aiming for a very high level of tree canopy on all new developments. We can't be doing that if the land is full of houses, but if some of this was green community land, we could still retain a community space within here, which I know is one of the concerns that we're losing.
Justin.
So Chairman, just on that last point, first of all, I don't believe it's community land. It's obviously it's in private ownership, and there's nothing to say that anyone has a public right to access that land. So I don't think that's something that we can justifiably consider as a reason for refusal. The other point I would just say, in terms of affordable housing, I just want to be very clear. The affordable housing provision, it's not that they aren't providing affordable housing, it is being provided in an off-site contribution. That's in accordance with our own adopted policy. So I think that is important to consider. Now, the policy does set out that on sites of more than 5 that we look for it on site as a starting point. So there is a consideration that needs to be made there. This is clearly bigger than that, it's 8. But as I've set out, the reason why it's been done as an off-site contribution is because the nature of the amount of land that there to be developed, it lends itself to larger properties with larger gardens. And that is what the developers put in. Like I say, they have so that is the justification for it. What they have said is that that they would consider it if that was going to lead to a refusal. That's not something that I think members should take offence at. I think the concern that I would have is that if it's refused on that grounds alone, or on some of the other grounds that have been discussed, like flood risk, where we have no objections from the engineers and highways, if we start to refuse things on those grounds, then I think there's a risk that it goes to appeal and we potentially have costs awarded against us and the development goes ahead. Sorry.
Justin, if I may, through you, Chairman, we have no objection from the Flood or Risk Authority because there are no plans for flood mitigation measures, and therefore we can't objection. So there is a condition awaiting them, which we will then look at to see whether that is satisfactory, if I understand correctly. If that's not satisfactory, we would, if we approve this, we would still have approved principle of development on the site.
Yeah, and I think Robin's about to
confirmed, but the issue is that if we had any concerns that there was a potential flood risk issue, we would be recommending refusal of the application. The fact is, and Robin will correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding is from a flood risk point of view, we are satisfied that a suitable drainage scheme can be accommodated on there. There's no risk of that. It can be accommodated. And that's why it's appropriate to put a condition on. If there was any doubt in our minds on that point, we wouldn't be recommending a condition. We'd have either asked for the additional surveys to be done up front, or we'd be refusing the application. I don't know.
Yeah, that's correct, Justin. We think a suitable measure can be put on that site, but they need to put the suitable measure to us after they've done ground investigations. They could put a pipe system, and Angular Water has said they can accept the flows. But from the LLFA side, I feel a more suitable ground infiltration system could be provided on site with individual plots.
Thank you. Councillor Rob.
I think this is a comment from a new councillor who's not familiar with all the procedures in this place, rather than a question for anyone. But it appears to me that the applicant is attempting to negotiate with the committee by indicating that they will supply some affordable housing on site in the event that this application is refused primarily on that ground. Is that a fair interpretation of what's happening?
Okay, do you want to come in on that?
Absolutely no, not whatsoever, councillor. I think Justin has clearly said that you can, our policy allows for an affordable housing sum. Okay. Now, obviously, all that's been discussed, not with you, but with the officer, is that they're open to both offers. They're open to both options. The sum or the now our affordable housing officer has said, well, actually, we're happy to accept a sum on such a small site. You know, that would be acceptable, and we can spend the money on another affordable housing scheme. And it's just a discussion between them, and that's been put forward to you. So that is an option, but it's in no way about trying to, trying to negotiate with you. It's just telling you that there is those possible two options that you can consider. So it's a consideration rather than an option to you, really. Just something to consider.
I think,
isn't it?
I was just going to say, it's really a case of if members were, and I'm not saying you are for any means, but if, for example, members were happy with a development in all other respects, and there was this item of affordable housing, as it is in this case, the developer will sometimes come to and say, okay, if that is the only issue, we might be able to do something with it, which is what's been said. In other examples, where I've had it where developers have gone, well, look, if the only option is this, rather than refuse it, we would be willing to consider amending a scheme in these particular areas. So it does happen that way, but ultimately you have to make a decision on the application that's before you. But one of the options open to you is to defer it to enable officers to go back and have further discussions with the applicant.
Yes, Hans.
Just out of interest, why do the planners consider this location? Is it that the planners don't consider this location ideal for affordable housing, and is that why they've gone with that? They're happy with the payment rather than the insisting on that affordable house being put on that site?
I think it's generally down to the other restrictions that are on the development. It's not that the site can't accommodate affordable housing. Yes, it can. It would be suitable for that. I think it's the nature of the type of affordable housing that you will put in there would inevitably be significantly smaller, I would have thought, than the properties that are on there. So you will then have, and this is what will the developer will have to consider, is what house types work in order to accommodate an overall scheme where the affordable housing blends in. Because what we don't want is large, all large dwellings and then two little affordable housing units tacked on the side that stand out like a sore thumb. Part of the policy requirement for affordable housing is that it blends in with the rest of the development.
Thank you. Councillor Corbyn.
Thank you, Chair. I'm sorry, maybe I need to talk to members here, but I'm still very concerned about the neighbourhood plan. The policy CO2H2 there states that future development should be predominantly a mix of 3 bedrooms and starter homes. Anything over 3 bedrooms should only be considered if applicants could show exceptional circumstances. Now, I'm not seeing exceptional circumstances here, members, and also the area of PLD, which I think is also another situation we've got to consider, because I'm really concerned about precedent. You know, I'm newly elected as well, and the concern going forward is that we need to make sure that the neighbourhoods doing their plans within PLDs, you know, it seems to me that this isn't exceptional circumstances. I'm not sure on the right way forward, but that for me is a massive thing that we have to consider before voting. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor West.
Thank you. For your benefit, Councillor Corby, one of the things that we have to take in mind here is that we've got to make best use of the land available as well. Now, this is an issue for me as well, because if it's going to get developed, then we need to develop it and make best use of the land, as NPPF says. Otherwise, we will end up with extra development elsewhere within the county that we might not otherwise have had. That said, I don't particularly like the lack of affordables on site here either. It is a very constrained site because of the access. In fact, we can't have more than 8 houses on that site. So it's a really difficult balance to find, and that's something we've got to weigh up in our own minds, each of us.
Thank you. Do we have any more comments or any proposals or people who forward contrary to the recommendation? If that's the case, the proposal before you is that we now move to recommend the application. Unfortunately, in planning, might is not a consideration. It has to be I will. Microphone, please.
I will make a recommendation for deferral, Chair. If I could take advice from Sherry.
Thank you. You would need
as
to
well.
give reasons.
Yeah, I will.
for
Yeah,
that.
I've got a list of them. Yeah.
Do you want to read out your proposal and your reasons, and then Sherry can comment against them?
Sure. So I'd like to propose deferral until we have seen adequate flood mitigation measures. I'd like to see an improved affordable provision. I'd like to see more housing mix in line with the neighbourhood plan, policy H2, COT H2. I'd like some of these conditions dealt with at the same time whilst the applicant is doing that. We've got a design guide. If this is going to come back to committee, I think we ought to be able to see external materials that will be used and everything. And boundary treatments. I'd like to see details of the renewables obligations for each plot, and I'd like a possibility of us imposing conditions for underfloor heating upstairs and downstairs, solar panels, 6 kilowatts per development per house, sorry, air source heat pumps, electric car charging point, which I know Justin makes the point aren't covered under building regs.
Sherry to comment on those, but
yeah,
the renewables is.
It's in the conditions, yeah.
So if I can come to some of those points, I think if members are minded to defer it, I think that the points that as officers we can go back and negotiate on are to look to try and look to seek to get the affordable housing on site, which will get 2 smaller units online, hopefully on site, which will then go towards meeting some of the policy of COT 2H2. What I don't think it will do is it won't get 3 bedrooms all across the site, but you'll probably have a mix of a couple of 3 bed and then 4, 5, something like that. In terms of the conditions, the conditions are that meet the tests in terms of the 6 tests, necessary, reasonable, or et cetera, et cetera. And in terms of that, it's unreasonable for us to insist and go back and say, you've got to provide that up front. We can go and ask the developer, they've listened obviously to the debate, and we can see what we can get up front, but it's not something that we could insist on, and should it come back next time with the affordable housing and size of dwellings resolved, then be reasonable to refuse the application because they haven't given the plot risk up front. We couldn't do that. And the other thing that we can't do is we can't insist on the underfloor heating or solar panels or things like that. Like I've already said, we don't have a policy that requires it. We can go back to the developers, they've listened, we can say, well, it may help your case if you include them at this stage, and we can see if they're willing to do that and provide what they can. As the applicant said, sometimes it depends on who's moving into the property and what those individuals want, but we can again see what we can do about that. I think they were the ones that were my main concern, Sherry. I don't know. Oh, the external materials. I think they were specified on the plans. I think it is a limestone, yeah. And I think we have got material. I think it might be a slate roof on that one. But I'd need to double check that we have got materials submitted.
I think I'm just to clarify what Justin said, I think the flood risk mitigation issue, I think, as I say, because we know that we believe that it can be mitigated, and you've got professionals telling you that. So it's just about the detail and how that's going to be done. So I think that would be a difficult one for you. And then obviously the neighbourhood plan issue that you've got would be with the housing mix. Obviously that would obviously be changed if there was affordable housing on site. So that's something that you could look at deferring.
Thanks, Chair. I wasn't making an enormous list because I was seeking to be awkward. I'm simply making a long list to make sure that when this does come back to committee, we are not severely restricted in terms of how we can make our decision. I'd like to keep our options very much open in that
I think
respect.
unfortunately we can only defer it and then debate the reasons for
That's right.
deferring.
Yeah.
Why I was listing a long list of reasons for deferring.
The difficulty
So
there is we
open up our
can't defer it
debate.
for things which aren't material planning conditions, such
Yeah.
as the renewables, etc. So certainly the housing mix is one.
Yeah,
what's the
you've
other
got
one?
the conformity with the neighbourhood plan ultimate policy with terms of the housing mix. As I say, the mitigation, you've got a condition on there anyway, haven't you, in terms of the flood risk? I can't, from what you're saying, is that it's because you haven't got the details, but your officers are telling you that they have had it and they have reviewed it, haven't they? And they believe that it can be. So
Just on the flood risk side of things, and again, jump in if I've got this wrong, but I think what we've seen is that there is a drainage system that Anglian Water have said that foul and surface water can go into their system and there's capacity to do it. What we're saying as lead flood authority is that there might be potential to do more sustainable options on site rather than pipe it into the existing network, actually have some surface water attenuated in holding tanks on each of the plots, and then it soaks away into the ground. But we can't confirm that element until they've done the drainage test. But overall, there is an acceptable drainage solution there.
Thank you. So, Councillor West, just so I'm clear, based on the planning conditions, is you're wishing to defer to review the housing mix in line with the neighbourhood plan and affordable housing.
Well, I'm still reviewing my list of potential conditions I've got written down here as well. And I mean, I still don't like the development outside the plan limits of development, and I take on board Justin's advice that there's no issue of precedent here, but that does still worry me quite deeply.
And but can we have a clear proposal for what you want to defer it on, please?
I think the issue, I think the issue with plan limits to development is if if members are adamant that they're not going to, they've got concerns about that, that would be a refusal on plan limits of development. Again, I think I've got this slide up there because it shows the planned limits of development and it shows the areas that the neighbourhood plan seeks to protect. It's outside of that area. There is residential and there's the community sports centre here, and then there's some sports pitches to the back of it as well. So I think again the issue for officers was that it was considered to be a logical, almost, it's not infill, but it is. It's sort of in terms of that gap there. It's a logical infill of that gap. Again, I think it would be different if we were talking about sort of this field here. Then we, as officers, we'd be probably recommending refusal of that on the basis that we now have a 5-year housing land supply. I think the fact is that although we have the 5-year housing land supply, this is still a logical and what we consider to be reasonable extension to Cottesmore, which will likely come forward at some point. But that is what members have to weigh up. I think if you're going to refuse it tonight, the ground would be on the plan limits of development issue. If you're content that is a logical and reasonable extension to the village that will help to meet our 5-year housing land supply, then the option would be to defer, potentially in line with Councillor West's possible recommendation.
Thank you. Can we please?
Yeah, I will recommend refusal, Chairman. I'll propose refusal, sorry, Chairman, based on the fact that the development is outside of the planned limits of development and it's contrary to the neighbourhood plan policy H2, which stipulates the housing mix. And that the committee is not satisfied by the flood mitigation proposals before us at the moment.
The latter would be
Okay.
difficult to defend.
I've
So can
seen
we-
Sherry shaking her head.
So to be clear, you are putting for a proposal to refusal based on the being outside the plan limits of development and on the policies of the neighbourhood plan around affordable housing and housing.
Yeah.
That's correct.
Yes.
If you're please, that can have a seconder. Councillor Wise. All those in favour of the new proposal to refuse?
6, Chair.
And against?
4, Chair.
Therefore, the new proposal is carried to refuse. Justin, are you clear on the reasons for refusal?
Outside the PLD doesn't comply with the housing mix in terms of the neighbourhood plan and the issue relating to off-site contribution rather than on-site affordable housing.
Thank you. Thank you, members. We'll now move on to the next application, which is 2022-0160 FUL, Ross and Campbell Developments, 35 Main Street, Empingham, construction of a new detached dwelling. The recommendation is approval, subject to conditions. Just give 30 seconds for members of the public to leave, and then Justin, the floor is yours. Thank you. Justin, over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. So the application site is at 35 Main Street, Empingham. I'll just draw members' attention to the addendum report, page 16 and 17 of the report. There've just been some comments in terms of additional comments from the Lead Local Flood Authority in terms of.
Could I ask members of the public to. Thank you, Mr. Brown. Thank you.
in terms of flooding concern, and that an issue on Cocket Lane is not a result of the development being carried out, and there's reference to the reporting drainage issues on our Fix My Streets thing, so that they can be suitably jetted drains, but overall it wasn't an issue to do with development on the site or a concern in relation to the proposed development. There were also some additional comments raised from residents in terms of the appearance of the proposed exterior of the building materials and access to the garage. And the proposed materials, as specified, the applicants have indicated that it will be coarse limestone rubble with ashlar detailing, red spray panel roof, and casement windows and hardwood doors, which are appropriate to the area. There's also going on clarification that the garage has been omitted from the scheme and no longer form part of it. And just the clarification at the bottom there, condition 2, just clarifying and amending the site plan so that the correct plans are referred to in condition 2. Also, in addition, there are a number of informatives that are set out in the report, which rather than informatives, they should really be conditions, and those are informatives 2, 4, 5, and 6, which should be conditions. So turning to the presentation itself, the application site, as you can see there, is forms part of the former rear garden to number 35, which is this property here, which has recently been redeveloped, and you'll see photographs of that. This is the proposed layout of the site. So this new development that's taking place to the north of the site. This is the proposed development. And you'll see in the report that there was a previous application refused and dismissed on appeal. It was significantly larger than what's proposed now, and filled up the majority of the application plot. So this is the refused scheme, which you can see from this picture here, went almost the entire width of the frontage, and also ran pretty much a large portion of the length of the garden, and was set very much at the front of the site. These are the proposed plans now, where you can see it's significantly reduced in scale and height. And rather than going the full width of the site, it runs the length of it, but again, reduced ridge heights as well. These are some pictures that just show the site and context of adjoining properties. And this is the new development. So this is Cocket Lane. The site is behind this property. So this is the property at front being redeveloped. And this shows the garden area of the site. I think that's towards the listed building, isn't it? There's a listed building just beyond the site, which is on, go back to the site plan. I think it's that one, the listed one, yeah, the listed. Yeah. Oh, sorry, I think so yeah, so you can see that, sorry, this plan shows it better actually, so this is the site in here, and you can see that the properties to the south and this property here are all listed buildings. So in terms of the policies are set out in the report and on the slides there. Again, policies in terms of protecting the historic environment, achieving good design, appropriate location for housing, etc. And then the design, etc. In terms of some of the key considerations that we've got there, obviously, design and appearance is a significant one, as well as impact on the neighbouring heritage assets, impact on public and residential amenity and highway safety, as well as the general character of the area as well. So I won't go through this in full, but basically there was, as I say, the previous scheme was dismissed at appeal, and that was primarily because of concerns about impact of the scale of the development and the impact that would have on the character of the area and also on the amenities of adjacent properties. One thing that the inspector did conclude at that time, though, was that the access arrangements were acceptable, and these are the relevant next steps from that. But they are also set out in the report. Generally, the access therefore was considered acceptable. It's been considered again by Highways, and no objections been raised to it. So the site, it is within the plan limits of development and complies with policy CS4 and SP5 of the core strategy and allocations document. The scheme has been significantly reduced in order to address the concerns raised by the Inspector and Conservation Officer on the previous scheme. And it is now at a level where the Conservation Officer considered that they don't object to the proposal, but they consider that it has less than substantial harm to the overall area, and that will, as such, the benefits of providing the additional dwelling outweigh any minimal harm there. In terms of residential amenity, again, the proposal has been amended significantly to ensure that there's no overlooking or loss of privacy or overshadowing. The properties, there were concerns with overshadowing to the properties to the north. A daylight sunlight test has been submitted, the shadow analysis, and it shows that whilst there would be at some times of the year some overshadowing of the garden, it's not significant, and the overall scale of the dwelling has been significantly reduced, which again helps to overcome those issues of overlooking and the overshadowing. So on that basis, Chairman, the fact that there's no objection from Highways and the Conservation Officer is happy with the proposals, it's recommended for approval subject to conditions.
Johnson. Again, we've got a number of deputations. Could I ask Donald Ross, member of the public opposed to the application, would like to come forward? Rules as previously 3 minutes from when you start talking. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, councillors, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. As a long-standing resident of the village against the planning application, you'll also note that Parish Council have also objected and have a number of other local residents, many of whom would be here but are unfortunately on holiday. Chairman, we do recognise that Endicott needs to play its part in providing new homes, but this is simply the wrong place. You've already granted permission to extend from 3 bedrooms to 8 on this site. It's a classic case of an applicant attempting to erode the resolve of planning officers, the local community, who have until now resisted development here. The applicant has taken an incremental and some might say calculated approach to development, under which the planning system could have been applied more reasonably, showing us and with a comprehensive scheme for the development of 35 Main Street, its rear garden and adjacent barn. You'll notice from the report under section planning history that a previous application for house was rejected. I quote from the statement: the proposed development would result in a loss of historically undeveloped space that contributes to the character and appearance of Crockett Lane and the setting of the listed buildings on the land to the south. This very clearly shows the development was considered unacceptable, and as a matter of principle by the council, the applicants of the group lost the appeal. It's extremely disappointing that your officers have not attached the full planning appeal decision in the committee report. Instead, they've included only two sentences. The inspector in his decision, this letter, and I quote, "The appeal site is an underdeveloped parcel of land that includes trees within frontage. Consequently, though enclosed by fencing, the site contributes to the area's spacious and verdant appearance. And consequently, the site makes a positive contribution to character and appearance of the area." The inspector also goes on to say, "The site makes an important contribution to the open character of Main Street due to its spacious character. The character is also especially evident due to the setting within Crockett Lane and being close to the junction of Main Street. Therefore, whilst being enclosed by fencing, the site is nonetheless highly visible in the street scene and makes a positive contribution in the setting within the conservation area." The chairman and councillors, the inspector's decision very clearly sets out that this is an important undeveloped open space within that conservation area. This is a matter of principle. Its loss would therefore lead to significant harm to the character and appearance of the conservation area and the setting of nearby listed buildings. Your conservation offer concludes that there would be less than substantial harm, but we must disagree with this assessment, particularly given the conclusions of the appeal inspector. We feel that the
Sorry, can I
harm
ask
would
you
be
to conclude,
significant.
please? 3 minutes left.
To us, the residents of this, we see this as a commercial attack on the effective environmental governance of our village, and we urge you to reject the application. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Ross. Committee, any questions? Councillor West.
Thank you. I'm just slightly confused by your comment about the site being changed from 3 to 8 bedrooms. Could you just repeat what you said there and expand on it for me? Because
Sure, I
that
can.
Lost
yeah.
me a bit.
Yeah, 35 Main Street was initially a bungalow. That bungalow was dropped. Went in for a 5-bedroom house, which is now built. 3 bedrooms in the adjacent barn is now sold. And this is an adjacent plot which the developer is trying to develop as well. So in my view, the development's already been done.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions from the committee? No, in that case, thank you, Mr. Ross, for your time.
Thank you.
Please can I ask Vic Pheasant, member of Empingham Parish Council, to come forward? Thank you, Mr. If you could turn on your microphone, your 3 minutes will start now.
As you heard from the previous resident, they're somewhat disappointed that there's clear different view about whether or not the effect it had or the effect it had on conservation area. We have in the past that we fully support the present conservation reserve. I don't simply say that the way you pointed out the new building on Main Street that is blocking the view into conservation area because the lane is the boundary of, or one of the boundaries of the conservation. We objected to that in the previous conservation disagreement. It completely blocks off the view of this present plot. We've got some problems with drainage. I mean, I believe they said it was the flooding that occurred recently was not the fault of this development of the house and the barn. Now, those developments did not concrete over the Great Gilmore land. That was hard standing while the three was there before. This one will be in the garden and take up the concrete overlay. We are concerned that we still have floods going down Main Street, which some members of the area will remember. On both sides of Main Street, in heavy rain, we get a stream down one side, Cottage Road the other side, and all our water, I believe, goes into either the Grosh, eventually goes into the Grosh or Northbrook. So there's a natural drainage from it because it goes around the village, that part of the village. What we've had now is flooding on number 2, which is the house immediately behind this block, on the 11th of May this year, which they just about stopped going into the house. And in early July, when we had that downpour, a fairly heavy downpour, number 22. Not caused by this, but for the residents, it looks as though the development's taking place, and all of a sudden we get flooding in Bucket Lane. We don't expect that there are underwater, underground streams there, we are told. For some of the older people, or older people, not old people, long-standing residents, so that there are underground streams running all the way down from North Main Street, all the way down, right down to the Broad.
Please conclude, Mr. President, the 3 minutes are up.
Right. We just think you haven't strengthened enough the thing about development because you have left it open to put in temporary buildings. You should change the wording to make sure it covers temporary buildings as well as permanent. It says it development should be restricted, should be careful and be restricted to the dwelling. That's the dwelling, not dwelling. They could put 5 temporary buildings in there and no effect.
Okay, thank you. We draw a conclusion there. Committee, any questions for Mr. President, please? No questions? Thank you, Mr. President, for your time. Please can I ask the applicant's agent, Mr. Ross Thane, to come forward? Your 3 minutes start when you start speaking. Please come right on. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak in support of this application. My name is Ross Thane and I'm the founder of RTK Architects based in Stamford, and my practice is hopefully familiar to you all. We put more applications to Rutland Council than any other firm and are very familiar with your local plan, the nuances of the local environment, and above all, we know the villages very well. We've made about 25 planning applications in Empingham alone over the last 30 years or so. This one has been a long drawn-out matter, which has been through a number of iterations, including a favourable pre-application inquiry, an ambitious, admittedly, initial scheme which went to appeal, and a fresh application which we assumed would be supported as we considered that it complied with the comments within the planning inspector's report, but was made smaller in January this year and smaller still in March after consultation with your officers. The end product is now a modest cottage of 3 bedrooms, 2 at first floor, 1 at ground floor, less than half the size of the original proposal. And a crucial aspect is that it sits comfortably within the street scene, supported by your own conservation officer, who has been very involved and worked closely with us. The end design is also sensitive to the local vernacular: stone rubble, dressed stone coins, a plain tile roof, very common in Empingham, not elsewhere in the county actually, and fits well inside this quiet corner of the conservation area, which is not a designated open green space. That is an important fact. There have been a few objections, mainly to do with access onto this quiet lane. The appeal process supported the access, and consistent with this, your own highways department supports the new drive. It sits right opposite another drive, and I suggest that it will make turning in and out of that one a little bit easier as well. The parish council have objected consistently to the notion of a house on this site, claiming loss of privacy and an increase in the likelihood of flooding. Loss of privacy has been considered by your own planning officer and dismissed, and I do not understand why the development would lead to an increase in flooding. Possibly a decrease through the use of soakaways instead of water runoff, but an increase, no. All surfaces have to be permeable, and that is a building regulations requirement. And so the surface here would be SUD compliant, and I can explain that if required. I hope you have made a site visit and seen the adjacent replacement dwelling and the barn conversion to Main Street, 2 of our projects for the same applicant, and the quality of those is very evident. They've received a number of positive comments. So the application is supported by your planning department with a positive recommendation for approval, The Conservation Officer, Highways, Ecology, Archaeology all support, and we consider that the application complies with the directions given by the Planning Inspectorate. I very much hope you can approve it this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tain. Questions from committee, please. No questions? In that case, thank you, Mr. Tain. Now the ward member, Councillor Waller, to please step forward.
Thank you very much, Chairman, members of committee. As has been indicated, there is a history to this site. It was originally one 3-bedroomed bungalow. It now has on it a very dominant house at Main Street, its junction with Main Street, and a barn conversion next to that, giving the appearance of actually quite a cramped site in a part of Empingham where typically the houses are not cramped and close together. They're Ancaster houses and they do have quite a bit of land at front and back. It is at the conservation area. Some years ago, the conservation area in Empingham was reduced, and therefore to the residents in the parish, it's actually really important that it is conserved. And whilst we are told there is less than substantial harm in terms of the aspect, we're told by the Conservation Officer, nevertheless, there is harm. And so what we're now getting on this site, rather than a 3-bedroom bungalow, which was there originally, and not the most attractive of buildings, I'll be the first to admit, we're now going to have 3 properties, loss of orchard, and it is on a hill as well, so it'll be dominant over the properties that are lower down the hill in Crockett Lane. And residents feel are very, very unhappy at the scale of development on this site. And I have every sympathy with them because it clearly now, to anyone who knows the village, with an extra house, will be a very overcrowded site in an area which is characterized by not being overcrowded. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee? No, in that case, thank you, Councillor Waller. Committee, open to debate and questions for officers, please. Who would like to open? Hans, thank you.
Just can you clarify once more? So it's for one 3-bedroom house and one barn conversion with how many bedrooms?
So the previous scheme, I think the barn conversion was done in here, and this is the dwelling that was put in there. So there's been 2 developments that have already been approved and built out now, which are these 2 at the top. This current application that you're considering today is for this dwelling here. This area of land forms the garden to the property that was here originally. Councillor Smith.
Yeah, I would like some clarification, please, because I went back to the application on the planning application site to look at. And in this report, you said that the conservation officer was satisfied that it was okay. But in one of the documents on the application side, by Fiona Wallace, it sort of doesn't match up with.
I can explain. I know what you're going to say. So what has happened, as the agent said, the scheme has evolved over time. So when this application first came into it was for a bigger scheme than what is before you today. So the conservation officer commented on that and raised concerns, which is the comments that you've got there. It has then since been further reduced in size, and so the comments that I've put in the report relate to the scheme that is before you now, and not the original scheme that the owner and officers felt to be unacceptable.
Let's ask another question, please, Mr. Chairman. I would also like to ask about privacy, because I have looked at the site, and it's on quite a slope down Pocket Lane. It would seem to me that it would overlook the properties, number 2, in Honey Cottage. I'm a bit surprised there aren't privacy issues.
So again, in terms of we've sought to reduce the overall height of the dwelling has been brought down, but also in particular, I think the main windows that would be of concern would be there are 2 bedroom windows at first floor level. The third one would be to a bathroom. Those windows are those windows there that face onto the listed building to the south. Separation distance to that property, so from the elevation to the side on, is approximately 12 meters to the boundary, and I think it's about 14 to the side of number 2, which would be in excess of what we would usually look for. Usually, side to garden depth, 2-story property would look for 10.5 meters, something like that, which would be 21 meters if you were facing habitable windows, which is not the case in that instance. There's also a number of trees on that site that are also proposed to be retained, which again will provide further screening to that property.
Justin, can I just clarify a point from there? I'm just looking at it on street view. Are the trees that are in front of the listed building property, so they're going to be retained? They do create significant screening. But thank you. It may have helped in the report to show the street view, because you can see the size of those trees. Any further questions? Councillor Corbett.
Yeah, thank you. Just looking back on the previous thing, my question is, this is again, it's a conservation area and it's a designated heritage assets. And we've got to look at the public benefits of this development within that conservation area. What do we consider are the public benefits?
So in terms of this scheme, it would be the provision of an additional dwelling towards our needs. So it's weighing up that against the less than significant harm that the conservation officer has referred to.
And that's my next question, Councillor Waller raised the point of less than significant harm. And enlarge on that. I mean, you know, it was refused based on significant harm. Are we now in a situation where it is less significant, a 3-bedroom against a larger property here?
I think the scheme that was previously refused, I think the issue there, and you'll see from that drawing there, it is a significantly larger mass and bulk that was on the plot. I think it effectively came quite close to the frontage here, and had quite a significant impact on the removal of a lot of the tree coverage on that site, but also the way that you appreciate the listed building to the south of the site when coming down Coffin's Lane. So what, taking on board the comments in the inspector's original decision, what we have sought to do is have this dwelling significantly reduced in size. And like I say, it came in following the appeal decision under this application, and we've sought further reductions to it, because we still felt it was too big. And so now it's also set quite a way back into the site behind, this is the garage block to the neighbouring property, the new build that's going on there as well, so that when you come down Cottage Lane, the site now retained its sort of open views across it, so that you still pick up the views across to the listed building, which is, I think, what somebody was referring to, that to some extent, some of that has been lost by the two-story building that's been built here. I mean, it was originally screened to some extent by I think the single-story dwelling that was there, but I accept that it's, two-story now, so it does have an effect, but it was further set back. This now, you come down Cottage Lane, we've set this building quite a way back, so that you still get the reviews, you still get the open nature of the area, and the dwelling is also gable on, which again helps to reduce its overall impact when viewed from the street scene. So taking all of those points into account, we think the applicants have gone a significant way in order to address those concerns of the appeal inspector. If we didn't, again, we'd have recommended refusal, but we think we're now at a point where we can support the application. Councillor Webb.
Thanks, Chairman. Having said in the previous application that we need to be consistent as a decision-making body, we have one thing sticks in my mind, which is a decision we made, which is similar to this, next to a listed building in Ridlington 2 years ago, where there was a similar, actually much larger stone house than this approved, right next to a listed building in Ridlington, and that was quite contentious, but considered to be still appropriate. For me here, the issue of proximity and impact on that listed building was probably the only real reason for refusal by the inspector before, and if that's been suitably mitigated in this new design, then I think realistically it's acceptable to me. I'm happy enough with it, and I'd be happy to put a proposal forward to that extent.
But before we do that, let's make sure there's no more questions from the committee. No further questions?
It's 9, Chair. 1 against. That's carried, Chair.
No, ladies and gentlemen, if you want a 30-second comfort break, please avail yourself of the situation. Here for their patience, if we could now, are we ready, guys, to carry on, please? Thank you. We now go on to application 20230774. Retrospective approval for the erection of a 2-story and single-story extension to dwelling, raising of the roof of the original house with a new thatched roof, addition of a window on the northeast elevation, repositioning of 2 windows on the southwest elevation, the addition of an extra chimney and the raising of the height of the existing chimney with a new rear door access, 2 garden sheds, parking and landscaping works. The recommendation is approval subject to conditions. Justin, to present the report, please.
Thank you, Chairman. The application site, you can see, is this property here, number 21, and includes this area of land here, and there's, I believe, a shared access that is in this location here. The proposed scheme as set out in the report, this is a retrospective application. planning permission was granted for alterations to the original dwelling, and this plan shows the original dwelling with mansard roof. What was, this shows the original floor space, so you can see that it was a two-bedroom property with fairly modest accommodation. This is the previously approved scheme, which shows again an extension and then a garden area to the rear, and this would be shared. These show the approved plan. So you've got the existing dwelling proposed. You can see it has an element of a two-story extension to the side and then a single-story element beyond. And it was to replace the mansard roof with a thatched roof. This just shows the rear elevation. And the approved plans, which you can see in there, provide an additional bedroom upstairs and much larger downstairs accommodation. These are the current proposed plans, which are on a similar footprint to the previously approved scheme. We show a number of outbuildings for the proposed Nelson shed, and the parking area is located 2 parking spaces in this area here. And again, this is the shared access arrangement with the neighbouring property. This plan indicates some of the key revisions to the scheme. The red windows are where they were originally proposed, and they were now built slightly to the side. And a number of new additional windows have been included, as well as an additional chimney has been installed. And then on the other side, I believe that you've got the chimney, and predominantly there's the door to the rear that was mentioned in the description as well, that has been included. Showing the elevations as well. Again, the one existing window and a new window at ground floor level. So in terms of the outbuildings, that shows the sheds that are proposed to be installed. In terms of the property, this is the existing property. You can see at the time the pictures were taken, it's quite overgrown in that area, especially on this end gable. I'll just go back to that picture, sorry. You can just see the entranceway in this location going on down. This was showing effectively, I think, the rear elevation that backs on or fronts onto the road. This is the side elevation or front of the property that looks out over the access road. And again, this is the rear once it's been cleared. The gable once the overgrowth has been removed. And this shows the rear of the site where the extension was proposed for. So now, as built, you can see stone property with the thatched roof, the new chimneys in place. This is the access road. This is the property itself. A significant improvement on what was there previously. So these 2 windows were moved slightly across. They were originally above the window and door. They've been moved slightly, but no significant greater impact from that. And the additional window at the end there. Show more of the windows. That's the rear of the property, and the door that's been put in is behind that fenced area there. Again, distinct from the other views from the street. And this is one from the rear of the site looking back. I think there were some trees that were removed, and there have been some replacement of the small trees that have been replaced to replace the ones that were, I think, originally shown as being repaired and that will be removed. This is showing the views from the windows looking down over the shared driveway, and its relationship with the neighbouring properties as well. And this is again views out of those windows. So the policies are set out in the report. It's referred to as a fallback position. In theory, rather than a fallback, it's the fact that they had planning permission for a development. It is a fallback in so much as they could, if members were unhappy with this, basically amend the scheme and have to take out what they've done and put it back. But the officer recommendation is that the changes are considered to be relatively minor and do not result in any significant greater impact than the approved scheme. The applicant, as I've shown, has provided different to show the position of the windows from those that were approved as built, and they were relatively minor. In terms of the additional chimney and raising the existing chimney, it's considered that it does not have an adverse impact on the street scene. In fact, overall, the scheme is a significant improvement on what was there originally. As we've set out, present build offers an improvement and is of a scale that's a maximum appropriate to the vernacular in that area, and does not detract from the listed buildings or conservation area property. As we've set out, the windows are not in a position where they would have greater impact than the original dwelling or the previously approved scheme. The extended property has been reduced in size to the southern end and is stepped down to reduce the overall form of the dwelling, and further we minimise impact on the neighbouring properties. And so taking into account the separation distances, it's considered that overall the scale of separation distances, that it doesn't have a detrimental impact on residential amenities. There have been some concerns raised from the neighbouring occupier, who I think shares the drive with the developers, and these photographs have been shown. You'll note from the approved plans it showed 2 parking spaces that were at the back in this location. That is what highways have required. There are, you can see that there is an area to the front here that is shared driveway, I believe, between the residents, and there's concerns about parking in that area. That is ultimately a civil matter between the two parties, and not something that as planning authority we can actively get involved with. The issue that we need to ensure is that there is adequate off-street parking there. And highways have considered the proposal, and they consider providing 2 off-street parking spaces is acceptable, and that there's also sufficient parking elsewhere within the immediate vicinity should additional vehicles need to park. And again, just to clarify, this plan just shows the previously approved scheme, which means we had 2 car parking spaces in this area here, and the new scheme, which is two parking spaces in this area here. So in a similar location, not significantly different from both. And as I say, highways have both no objections on those grounds. So overall, it's considered that the works I've carried out in the 2 sheds are appropriate for the area, will not have an adverse impact, and it's therefore recommended for approval, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Justin. A number of speakers on this application. Please ask George Waitman, member of the public opposing the application. Come forward. Wait, if you turn on your microphone, you have 3 minutes from when you start speaking. Thank you.
I represent Astle Planning Consultants, and I will be speaking on behalf of Mr. Colin Smith of 17 Main Street. Colin would have liked to have expressed these concerns himself, but due to health problems is unable to speak for extended periods. Our client has been concerned since on-site works digressed from the originally approved plans. He doesn't question the quality of the works, but it's the manner in which it has digressed. Much has been said in the committee report and by officers this evening regarding the differences between the extant permission and the current application. It discusses differences in windows, chimneys, doors, trees, and planting. However, it remains silent on differences which impact our clients, their family, and other neighbours the most. These being the differences in parking and turning facilities. You can see the photos there that we provided. The original cottage provided one parking space. This limited use and impact on neighbours. While the extant permission provided 2 parking spaces with 8.5 metres of unobstructable turning space. And this was at the request of Rutland County Council's own highway engineering comments made as early as June 2020, which stated, and I quote, "It is important that parking spaces are provided with adequate dimensions and demonstrated to work in terms of adequate manoeuvring in and out the site in a forward direction." The former officer report for the extant permission specifically referenced adequate turning facilities in reaching the previous decision for approval. Now we arrive at today. The proposals provide no turning space. Vehicles cannot both enter and exit the site in a forward-facing direction, and up to 5 cars, as shown in the officer's photos, are regularly being parked at the application site back to back. And you can see that requires regular manoeuvring to both enter and exit the site. These arrangements cause great disturbance to neighbours and are dangerous while causing damage to the village green. And we provided photographs in the past to those ends. They are inappropriate for a tight area of shared access, the access which is now regularly parked by parked cars. Officers mentioned this as a civil matter, but these impacts are a direct consequence of the proposals and impacts which should subsequently be controlled by any sort of a decision made here this evening. The number of cars and the manner they are parked at the site is not in accordance with the plans recommended for approval or comments in the committee report or in line with highway comments. It is my client's strong opinion that it is not long before someone will be hurt and serious damage caused. And for these reasons, he no longer allows his young children to use the area of shared access. Yet no comment or justification is made for why, unlike the previous consent, no turning facilities are now required. We do not see how this matter can be appropriately or accurately decided until the impacts of parking, access and turning are once again controlled.
3 minutes now.
In the absence of adequate turning facilities, and given all the continuing issues compounded with the lack of controls on parking and access arrangements, we respectfully compel members to refuse this planning application due to the unsafe parking arrangements.
Thank you. Members, any questions? Thank you, Mr. Wayman. Can I invite Mr. Tim Bale on behalf of the applicant? Thank you. Turn your microphone, your 3 minutes. We'll start with you guys. Thank you.
Evening, Mr. Chairman, members. Yeah, I'm speaking on behalf of the applicant. I didn't design the original scheme, but it has been approved and has been built as per plan. There has been 1 or 2 minor changes as we've discussed and highlighted, one being the chimney and a couple of windows. I think there was reference that it's about the same size. It is the same size that was approved, so it hasn't been extended at all since then. And I think there was also reference to 2 additional windows on 1 elevation. They were also part of the original consent. There are 2 windows that have been moved, as highlighted, that have been accepted. In terms of the parking, which has just been highlighted, we've got a 3-bedroom house, and from a highways point of view, they only ever look for 2 parking spaces with that, which we can provide adequately. Yes, they are going to be reversing out, which is what was in place originally and is the same for all those that use that shared access. So highways are very comfortable with it. We've worked very hard with the planning officer. We worked very hard with highways and with conservation, and all have been truly satisfied with where we are today. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee? Christine.
Can I, looking at that diagram, the difference between the two parking, one is what I call echelon parking, and the other one is just straight parking. Can you explain to me why you've moved from one to the other? Given that you're still saying it's two parking spaces,
Yep.
why have you moved from one to the other?
To my defence, I didn't do the first one. So, but I have done a survey of the site for this and that works. I'm not going to say that didn't work, but I wasn't involved with that, so it's difficult to comment on that. But with this one, we've done a survey of it and that works. And we can get 4 in there. And we did suggest 4 parking spaces and Highway said, no, it's fine. 2 is more than enough for the site.
Thank you, Christine. Can I ask for a point of clarity? I don't know if it comes from you, Mr. Bale, or from the development manager. There's a bit of a contradiction. You say those 2 windows aren't additional, but the report said they were additional. We just have clarity about that. Please.
Sorry, Chairman. I think I said there was 1 additional window, which was this window here.
That one, yeah.
These 2 were still there. They were just moved rather than they were originally in line with the window below and the door. They were moved slightly over, I think primarily due to the internal arrangements.
Okay, so my misunderstanding. So there is 1 additional additional window. Can I just ask Mr. Bell why there is 1 additional window and additional chimney, which is against the original back?
Yeah, the additional window is in the ensuite. In terms of the chimney, ironically, that's where the original chimney was. So the fireplace is directly below that, and that has been retained internally. I think as they built it up, they decided actually we'd like to use this fireplace. So the chimney at the front of the building is the one sitting exactly on the original chimney or fireplace of the house, if you like, where the one at the back was added as part of the previous application. So they decided they want to utilise this original fireplace, and that's why they added it. Obviously, they should have ideally come back for an amendment at that point, but that's why we're addressing it now. But I think in essence, the 2 chimneys work. And a lot of properties around the area have got 2 chimneys, and if anything,
I'm not disagreeing. It's the fact that it was done without permission. You said the other window is en suite. I assume that's going to be obscured glass.
Yeah.
Thank you. Any further questions from the committee? In that case, thank you, Mr. Bale.
Thank you.
Our final deputy is Councillor Samantha Harvey, the ward member.
Thank you, Chair. Evening again, committee. As members can see from this report, this application is complicated and has been ongoing for some time. I'm pleased that we're finally in a position to be presented to yourselves and that the plans now finally detail the house that was actually built. No one will dispute that the stone house is a vast improvement to the derelict property that was in situ. However, that does not mean that we can ignore planning rules, especially in the heart of the conservation area. There are still some outstanding concerns regarding this build. The 2nd floor window on the southwest elevation, which on the plans was the first window on the left of the plans, has been moved to the right. This has placed it directly opposite the window in the gable end of number 19, which is listed some 6 meters away. You can actually, you showed a picture of the view from that window if Justin would go back. This has left 2 bedrooms looking directly into each other, some 6 meters apart. That one. The Rutland Design Guide states where practicals, windows should not look onto private areas of other homes, including habitable rooms, which are living rooms, dining rooms and bedrooms. kitchens and patio areas in gardens immediately adjoining the building. The 45-degree rule states that there is normally the potential to achieve adequate levels of daylight and outlook when no part of the building cuts through a line radiating at 45 degrees from the centre of a window that lights a habitable room. Applications will generally apply to front and rear single-storey extensions, which project 4 metres or more in depth, and to 2-storey extensions, which project 3 metres or more in depth. The 25-degree rule states that there is normally the potential to achieve adequate levels of daylight and outlook when no facing building breaks a 25-degree angle from the horizontal from a point 2 metres above the floor level. This rule takes account of changes in level between buildings. Where habitable rooms face the rear of a home, the back-to-back privacy distance shown should normally apply, and you heard about those in the previous application. The window in number 19 is a split window, of which half is in the bathroom and half in the bedroom. The left side is the bedroom, and that's the opening part. There is no doubt that privacy and light is detrimentally affected. This is contrary to the extension to dwellings 2015 and the Rutland Design Guide. In the approved plans 2020-0540, parking and access were detailed and required the turning circle. This was to prevent reversing in and out of the site. This has now been dropped and parking is for 2 vehicles only. It's worth stating that since the house has been occupied, 4 vehicles are regularly parked. It raises concern regarding the access to the shared drive and its proximity to the Village Hall Drive and parking directly outside the Sun Inn. In 2021, I submitted a highways concern regarding this junction after witnessing a near miss concerning a child going to football practice. It's a dimly lit area, tightly congested and very busy in the evenings football practice is on, with limited parking in front of the pub. The concern is still being investigated by the relevant highways process, but the reversing of vehicles directly in this area will compound the problem. There are no plans for waste management, contrary to CS2, CS19, SP15 and the MPPW8 and design guidelines, and with 4 cars in that parking area, there is no room for bins or the ability to move them past the cars. On the plans, there are no green energy and climate change proposals, contrary to the previous SP15, CS20, COTI N1, and the addition of the second chimney increases the carbon footprint. I ask that these points are taken into consideration during your debate.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. Are there any questions from the committee? In that case, thank you, Councillor Harvey. Before we go to debate, I would very much like to make sure we have enough time for this and for the Barragan application. Can I ask for a proposer to extend till 10 o'clock? Seconded, please. Thank you, Karen. All those in favour? Those carried. Thank you.
Thank you.
Open to debate. Questions from committee, please. Councillor Payne.
I'm just slightly concerned of exactly what it is we're being asked to decide here, Chair. Because there it is, it sits there, it has been built. Clearly, some things have been done that perhaps weren't actually in the original build plan. But I'm not quite sure what I'm being asked to do here.
It's a retrospective application, so you're asking to approve whether or not those, correct me if I'm wrong, sorry, but whether or not those changes are legal in terms of planning. For example, windows have moved. As Councillor Harvey pointed out, you have to decide whether or not that is proving an issue overlooking another bedroom, the changing in the parking, the additional chimney, and it is effectively to legalise this application and the impact of those changes.
Chairman, if I can just come back. So in theory, the element is this worse than what was previously approved? Now, I think there was mention, I think Councillor Harvey mentioned the bedroom window position. The red line there sort of outlines the existing position, both windows, and you can see that they have been moved across slightly, but in terms of whether that generates any significant greater overlooking than the original window that was in the dwelling, officer's opinion is no, it doesn't. There's a condition for the bathroom window and to be obscure glazed as well in order to look at that. There is the issue around the parking, I've just been talking to the highways officer. Because I think 4 parking spaces were originally shown, it was then reduced to 2. And I think highways haven't got an issue in terms of the manoeuvring of the vehicles. There was, I think, 1 space originally, it accepted that, and the reversing was accepted. I think where we're just discussing the issue is about the 4 vehicles, and they were removed, and I think the issue about blocking the access, that is a civil matter and not one that we can get involved with in planning terms. But in terms of the intensification of the use of the access, then that is something that we could possibly do something about. Robin suggested possibly a condition to ensure that there are only 2 parking spaces provided, and we could have require a plan to show that require something put in place to demonstrate that other area can't be used for parking, so that there isn't an intensification of the use. I think that is probably, the only other issue that I think we could reasonably possibly do something. In all other respects, it's acceptable. The change is, yes, they should have got planning permission first. It's not a criminal offence to do that. You can apply retrospectively. That's what the applicants have done. And I think subject to the conditions that we suggested, that it will be acceptable. My only other suggestion is that if members are concerned by what they've heard today about parking, then we could add this additional condition to require only 2 spaces on site, and the details of how that's going to be restricted has to be submitted to us within, I would suggest, a month in order to get that information.
Councillor, is this relating to the same question, Councillor?
It is, it's thanking you for a very full answer. Yeah, and I now know what it's about. Thank you.
Very polite of you. Councillor West.
Thanks, Chair. So is the issue that those additional 2 spaces are actually, they're parking on a shared area?
Thank you, Jack. They're not parking on a shared area, so they are parking on the property land.
Yeah.
The previous scheme and the original property only had 2 parking spaces. They've then come through with a plan showing 4 parking spaces, so you're almost increasing the traffic for that property. So what we as the local housing authority said is they need to show 2 parking spaces, which they showed. But what's obviously happening on site is they're parking 4 vehicles there, which is causing concern to the neighbouring residents. So then what we feel would be suitable is a condition that makes them not be able to physically park 4 vehicles there. So what measures they put there is up to them to decide, but then that comes through to us. But it will mean that they can only physically park 2 vehicles on that parking space, which again then reduces the numbers from 4 down to 2, which we then wouldn't have any concerns with.
That sounds sensible. Thank you.
Councillor Moore.
I have to admit, when we were looking at the photos, I was quite surprised that planning permission had been given for a window to look directly into the window of another house. When we then find out that that's one of the windows that has been moved, and looks to me on the diagram as if it's been moved enough, and so it's been moved in a position where it wasn't directly looking in, and it now is. I have some concerns about the impact on the neighbour.
Chairman, just through you, I think this plan shows it best. The window's been moved. I don't think I've got the exact measurement there, but it's about a metre, something like that, to the side. I think if you were in that room, I don't have a picture from the original window, but I don't think it's significantly worse than what was there originally. You would have originally been able to see into that neighbour's property from the window of the original dwelling. What they've done is, yes, they've moved it slightly further across. One's moved like in one direction, so one's arguably further away, one's slightly closer, but I still think you get a similar relationship to what was there originally. You can see that the window actually half overlaps where just under a quarter overlaps the original position of the window. So I don't think it's significant that we could argue that there was any more overlooking to an appeal inspector.
Thank you. Councillor Smith.
Just for clarification, if we turn this down, this retrospective application down, it would mean they'd have to move everything back, take the chimney down, etc.
Well, it's not as straightforward as that. I think if you were to refuse it, I think they would appeal the decision. My professional opinion is that it would be allowed on appeal. But yes, if the appeal was dismissed, then yes, what they would have to do would be implement the permission that they'd originally got.
Councillor Webb.
Are we able to condition in obscured glass on that bedroom window?
No,
No.
I don't think that would be reasonable. The fact, I think what we've got to bear in mind is that had there been no window there to start with, then yes, we'd have probably said you can't have a window there, or it has to be obscure glazed. The fact is that there was an original window in a very similar location that wasn't obscure glazed, and I think that's where it's unreasonable for us to require obscure glazing.
Any further? A proposal. I like a proposal. Councillor Webb.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to propose approval subject to condition limiting it to 2 parking spaces.
Could I have a second for that, please? Wow. Take your pick, David.
I think Councillor Payne was first.
Thank you. So the revised proposal is for approval with the condition of only 2 parking spaces and measures to ensure that that happens. All those in favour?
It's unanimous, Chair. That's carried.
Thank you. We now move on to the final application of the night, which is 2023-0279 Full, 14 Main Street, Barradon. Retrospective change of use from annex to holiday let to include letting to the general public. The recommendation from officers is refusal. Present, please ask Justin to present the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. So the application site you can see is outlined in red, and the outbuilding is this building here. So again, you can just see this is the building that the application is predominantly related to. Notes, yeah, so planning permission was granted for the conversion of the outbuilding to use as a residential annex, and at the time that comprised an office and study and an adjoining WC, and a further extension to the outbuilding to provide a dog kennel, an implement shed was granted in 2008. The proposed scheme, so this is the should the office and the extension to it and kennel and the bedroom there as well. This shows a view from the street scene, and you can just see the outbuilding outlined in red here. A view looking from within the garden. See a relatively nice stone built annex. These are some shots from within so you've got the bedroom, a kitchen, small kitchen area, and a shower room, toilet. So the report sets out clearly all of the policies in some detail. The main issues, taking them in turn, the proposal has permission to be used for ancillary residential accommodation. But planning permission would be required to use it as a holiday let. In planning terms, the amenity impact, the difference between using it as a holiday let to it being used as an ancillary accommodation for what planning permission was granted previously, is not significantly different, and so using that, occupying it as a holiday let is unlikely to result in in terms of overlooking or anything like that, any significant impact. And the proposal does not change the character of the area or have an unacceptable impact on heritage assets. However, where the character of the use does change, it relates to highways and parking. Clearly, if it's not ancillary to the house, it's people coming for tourism use, they're likely, given the location, to bring their own car. It's only likely to be one car, but the proposal would result then in additional pressure on the existing on-street parking, contrary to the relevant planning policies. And this is where we have our concern. In general, there is no suitable way of providing for off-street parking of vehicles. And on that basis, the local highway authority has raised concern, given the parking issues on site. The parking within Barradon can be an issue anyway, and so any additional on-street parking would cause further harm to highway safety. And for that reason, Chairman, it's recommended for refusal.
Thank you, Justin. Our first speaker is Julie Park, member of the public, opposing the application. Like to come forward. Your 3 minutes start when you start speaking. Thank you.
Okay, I had notes readily prepared and added to as I've listened during this evening. However, what the planning officer has just said has absolutely incensed me. So I will refer to what I've written, which I would have read out within perhaps a minute, and to state that to make out that an ancillary building to a main house being used for an office, a dog kennel, storing your implements in, whatever, yeah? A garden shed effectively, but a stone building instead of a wooden garden shed. That being used as a holiday accommodation is of no difference to it being used as that, as I've just described, is ludicrous beyond compare. What planet are you on?
How do you please be respectful to the officers?
Well, I'm sorry, but this is
No, sorry, if
just
you're not
outrageous.
I know, but if you're not
It's outrageous.
if you're not
You can tell
respectful-
the passion. I'm speaking as a fellow human being.
But-
We're all human.
but respect.
And these applications, he looks at policies, he looks at SP this. I've listened to all the planning speak tonight. These are human beings and human lives that you all make decisions on. But all he does as a planning officer is look at statutes.
Sorry, if you are not respectful to the officers, I will stop you there.
I am merely making a point here that this is humans you're dealing with.
But planning has to deal with policy.
Yeah, well, I refute what he said
Okay,
completely,
that is
and I
fine,
want
but
that
please
on
do it
record.
respectfully.
Right, back to what I was saying. I have a right to speak, by the way, human rights.
Yes, you do, but respectfully.
In your opinion, that was not respectfully. In my opinion, it's showing passion. We will differ on that. Article 8 of the Human Rights Act states a respect to private and family life, a right to privacy. This, if granted, is an Airbnb with its proximity. If we could see the true picture of where that is in regards to my property, not the elongated abnormal photograph, which is very nice, but doesn't truly reflect how it impacts on my home. Is that available? In fact, very kindly, the photograph, I believe, was taken secondary, which showed the view from the Airbnb bedroom to the proximity of the front of my property. Still can't see it. I would like to see that photograph, please, and I think everybody here on planning should be able to see it.
Chairman, they're the plans that are in the presentation.
No, 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 there was an additional photograph submitted. I saw it with my own eyes on the planning website.
Doesn't form part of the presentation.
It doesn't form part of the presentation.
Well, then this is swayed toward the applicant and not towards the person who's directly going to be implicated on this.
If the presentation is what it
No,
is.
no, no. Well, I'm sorry, it's an incorrect presentation.
Well, it is, the presentation is what it is.
It's an incorrect presentation.
Well, that is your opinion.
No, no, you are not presenting the facts in full for people to see.
Could I just remind that you, obviously you have this 3 minutes for you to be able to put that forward. So you could clearly, I mean, obviously we've got the information that's been presented. If you want to use your 3 minutes, which you're more than likely to do, just to discuss how it impacts your property.
Right to privacy, right to security. We have no way of knowing what type of person is going to be using that holiday let.
That's not a planning consideration.
I'm sorry?
That's not a
I
material.
have a
planning
right to
consideration.
security in my own home. That is a human right.
Well, that can be debated by committee. Committee, have you got any questions for the speaker? Councillor West.
Only one, which is that I'm not entirely sure what your issue with the officer's presentation is, because
It's
the
not
officers
correct. It's not
recommend
factual.
refusal.
I
and
know,
you're-
I know he has, but I think I mean, I've lost it tonight and I do apologise, but it was listening to that actually read out what he said that just incensed me. I do have a temper. Forgive me, I'm human and I'm female. The refusal is purely on highways. I think there's a much bigger issue which I want you all to take on board.
Sorry, your 3 minutes is up.
Which is about the Airbnb and how it impacts on people living in close
Thank you.
community.
Thank you. Your 3 minutes up. If the committee want to question officers on that, they can do.
Yeah.
Any further questions? Thank you. Can I ask the next speaker, Gordon Brown, member of Barrington Parish Council? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I have to say, I didn't expect to be back just as quickly to the planning committee. But here I am. Thank you. I'm here on behalf of Barrington Parish Council to support the officer's recommendation to refuse the application. In Barrington, we are very passionate about our neighbourhood plan. I'm glad to hear that other members of the committee are as well. I think the officers know that all too well in discussions we've had over the years. At the referendum in March 2019, over 40% of our electorate turned out, 80% voted in favour of our policies. The neighbourhood plan supports the appropriate development in the village, but ensures that it does not detract from the character or adversely impact residents' amenities. The neighbourhood plan is more up to date than the local plan document, and as such takes priority over those aspects of the local plan, as I'm sure your legal advisor will confirm. I'd also like to point out that in paragraph 12 of the NPPF, it states where a planning application conflicts with the up-to-date development plan, including neighbourhood plans, permission should not usually be granted. The neighbourhood plan included specific support for bed and breakfast accommodation, which is described in page 62 of your report. There are 3 conditions to be met in that policy, BW 12, and those conditions are as raised by the officer. The first one being the building itself should not have an adverse impact on the character of the surroundings of the village. It does not, and therefore that condition is met. However, in relation to condition 2, the impact on neighbouring properties, the property has already failed on this, and you've seen the passion from the resident on that point. You recall that this is a retrospective application and residents' concerns about the guests coming and going from the property without any direct control or management. This has the potential to impact on the tranquil atmosphere of the village, and especially the immediate neighbouring properties. Therefore, I have to disagree on this occasion with the officers on this point. This is a material planning consideration and is explained in the neighbourhood plan, and therefore the application fails on condition 2 as well, in my view. Condition 3 of BW 12 is parking. This is a major issue. There is none.
The applicant suggested in his original plans was space for 3 cars within the property. This is patently not the case. There's hardly space for 1 vehicle, and even then it's suitable for a small vehicle without blocking access to number 12's main gate. In addition, access on and off the site is dangerous because of vehicles parked in Main Street. And you may have seen the aerial view showed 3 cars parked there. That is normal. 4 even is quite normal as well. Highway officers have expressed their strong objection to the application because of the lack of off-street parking and safety on part of Main Street. The neighbourhood plan is very clear in this matter. Requirements 3 states there should be adequate provision on site for parking and manoeuvring. This is not the case. The Bardon neighbourhood plan should be followed in line with paragraph 12 of the National Planning Policy Framework, and the officer's recommendation to refuse is correct. The Parish Council fully supports that position. I'd ask you to follow the officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Gordon. Any questions from the committee? In that case, Mr. Brown, thank you. Yes, just to please clarify.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll just clarify a point. In terms of the use of the building, perhaps I was not as clear. It is, as Gordon has said, a material planning consideration, the use of it. What I was trying to get across is that the use of that building, which is effectively a single bedroom with a bathroom attached to it, which could be used by a family member or as additional living accommodation. On that basis, using it for accommodation in a similar way, albeit as a holiday let, would not be something that I believe that we could demonstrate had significantly worse impacts than the way it could be operated by the residents of that property. They could quite easily have a family member live in that building without requiring planning permission, all day, every day, all of the week. Whereas the use of it as a holiday let is not likely to be as intensive as that. That's not to say that the key issue for us as a planning authority in this instance is the fact that somebody using it as a holiday let would also be driving to and from the site. And that is why I think we can sustain a reason for refusal on those grounds, but on those grounds alone. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Justin. Questions from committee? Councillor Payne.
I'll keep it brief. I mean, the parking is there. It's start, and this is an issue that I just mentioned is coming up more and more with Airbnbs and around. I'm getting a couple of these as well, and it's always about multiple parking, multiple problems, and residents suddenly discovering they've got an Airbnb when they never thought they had one. Now this parking is just ridiculous, and it's an absolute no-no in one.
Councillor Payne. Councillor Corbett.
Yes, again, I've just reinforced the point of the neighbourhood plan. That's exactly what it's there for. I've spoken out about that several times this evening. So from my point of view, it should be reviewed.
Any other questions? I have to concur with Councillor Payne and Councillor Corbett. Neighbourhood plan and parking is not acceptable. Somebody'd like. Wasn't on the list.
Sorry, what was your name, sir? Yeah, did you contact us directly to, which email, by phone or email? Myself. I never received, none of you got an email from Helen in our planning committee. Yeah, when you were sent the request. Especially if you can accept.
I'm happy for you to have your 3 minutes.
I should send it to your government email rather than democracy.
No, you can't. Sorry, you can't. Can,
Thank you for letting me speak tonight. The annex was approved as an office in WC in 2007. The two-storey extension to the rear of number 14 was approved in 2008. And as the planning officer notes in his valuation, no restrictions were placed on the permission to prevent additional residential accommodation being provided within the building at that time. Consequently, in 2007, consequently, the permission in 2007 allowed for the use of the building accommodation for visitors associated with the dwelling. And consideration for the application therefore must focus on the potential differences between accommodation for visitors to the property in association with its occupation and visitors on a commercial basis. Visiting friends and family are likely to be there in larger groups and at the same time, more likely to eat at the host dwelling, more likely not to visit local attractions, more likely not to shop in the local shop, and can visit 365 days of the year. They can make as much noise as they like within reason, and they can park on the street. Commercial guests are more likely to eat out, especially at the newly refurbished local pub. They're more likely to be out visiting local attractions during the day. They're more likely to shop for local supplies at the village shop. And they have restrictions through companies like Airbnb on noise and disturbance. They're more likely for it's more likely for the host to be away when commercial guests are staying, reducing the number of cars, and the use can be restricted for X number of days a year. The application being put forward for refusal on the grounds of SP 15 of the local plan on design and amenity, which is split into 13 sections, of which one is parking. The remainder are design based, and the annex meets all of the required guidance. The approved applications allowed there to be a total of 6 habitable rooms in the annex and the host house. Neither application showed highway consultation or requested any additional parking with that increase in habitable rooms. The highways design guide states that a property with 6 habitable rooms should have 2 parking spaces, which there are. I think the photo, so there's the gap between the 2 buildings is 3 by 6.5 meters, and the space directly behind the annex is another 6 by 3.1 meters. Admittedly, you can't exit in forward gear unless you're reversing, but those spaces are there and were part of the approval for the 6 habitable rooms historically. Admittedly, that was before the local plan and the neighbourhood plan. Highways seemed concerned that the approval would set a precedent for other developments to have limited parking, but previous conversion to the annex prior to the adoption of the current local plan sets this apart from future applications.
so Councillor, conclude, you've got to say it.
Holiday let ticks many more boxes in terms of tourism, economic development, historic and sustainable urban development, and it would be a much greater benefit to Barrington.
Thank you. Any questions from committee? Councillor Corbyn.
Yeah, can you just confirm, I think reading through the notes previously, the applicant themselves have stated categorically that there is no parking allowed on the property.
There are currently gates on the access to the property from the high street, but the width of that whole area is a level gravel driveway, and this is full size to parking. So that distance there is 3 meters by 6 in front of the annex, and then there's one parking.
Please, can you be? Well, because you will have to be asked to leave. Can you please? You'll be asked, can you please leave the meeting? Thank you. Any further questions? Yes, please.
Just a quick one about that parking. I mean, I agree with Councillor Corby that I thought the application said there was no parking on site for people taking Airbnb. If you had those 2 parking spaces you show, if the residents park in their Airbnb, in front of the Airbnb, and the residents of the house parked on the drive, the Airbnb people can't leave.
Yeah, so it would be tandem and they would, need to
There
let
has
them
to
know.
be some sort of agreement between them, either resident comes in. How feasible is that?
Well, as I
Maybe
said-
that's an unfair question.
Well, thank you. We've got 2 choices. We can either go to a vote now and we'll have to defer the decision till next time. If we've got no, have we got any further questions? If you've got any further questions from the committee to officers. Thank you. The proposal in front of us is for refusal. Please ask for a proposer. Councillor Corby, seconder. Councillor Smith, all those in favour of refusal?
That's unanimous, Chair.
No, no.
Sorry, 9. Against,
Against,
abstentions.
abstention,
That's 9 for the recommendations, 1 abstention. Thank you. It's still carried, Chair.
thank you. Tonight, we've got no time for the appeals report. Can I ask Justin if it's attached to all the?
Yeah, it's attached and there's nothing, there's been no decisions, Chairman, so there's
Yeah,
nothing.
any
to add.
questions, please address Justin directly, and I'll not be afforded any other urgent business. So I close this meeting at 10 o'clock exactly.